Good afternoon, everyone. We'll continue with the last but one section called Alternative Server-Side Frameworks. So last week we talked about the servlet. So in fact, the servlet is not the only method for us to do the server-side web programming. We can also use some high-efficient frameworks to do the website programming. So here we are talking about the two methods. Basically, the first one is the server-side scripting. The second one is the web application frameworks. So frameworks, that means it contains some libraries, tools, so we can utilize them for more efficient website server-side programming. And for different program language, we have a different framework. Especially, we are talking about the Python one, which is the Django framework. Okay, let's start with the first one, server-side programming. So for the server-side scripting, the main reason we want to use the script language, as you know, is just we want to have a quick way to have a prototype programming, so it will be easy for us to build a prototype website. So here is the same. So for example, if we use Java or C to develop a web application, it will be very time consuming. But if we can use some server-side scripting language, it will be more efficient. So this is the main reason. Just for example, here we want to perform some tasks related to database queries. In fact, we can do it like this way. We can put the SQL or related things into the HTML code directly. Later we'll talk about some examples, for example, like JSP. And so that means you can accept input, of course, from the request, and you can just extract the input, and also you can run the SQL query relatedly. So in the code, that means you can use some high-level program language, use SQL and use JSP to perform that task, meet the request. So after that, you can generate results based on the returned results. Okay, generate a result HTML. So for example, for the second item, we said you can also just extract the input values from the forms, because the request is sent from the client side. So usually we use, for example, you input your first name, last name, or some other information, and then click submit. So this request will arrive at the website. So this website, the server side will process this request. So we need to develop some web application to process this request. So that means we can get that input very easily if we use some script language rather than just use Java or C like these generic ones. Okay. And when this request has been solved, we can also utilize the script language to generate a result HTML file and then send it back to the client side. So this is how we use the script language to develop a web application to meet the request from the client side. And then we have a lot of server-side scripting language, but mainly in the following we use the JSP as an example, because different ones may meet for different purpose for different language as well. So for example, like Java JSP is called Java server-side pages. So this one is a very common one. So we use this one as an example. And PHP is also used very often. And Ruby on Rails, that's related to Ruby program language. We can also use some general purpose script language like the VB script from the Microsoft and the Perl or Python. Okay. So let's look at this JSP example, Java Server Pages example. So basically, we put the JSP code into HTML. That means it is embedded into the HTML because the reason is that on the server-side programming, basically we want to generate results. But how to generate results? We need to write some HTML code. And for here, we can do this one in an automatic way. For example, the first 3 lines is simple HTML, and then on the bottom HTML. This is a tag for defining HTML. And after that, we have a head. So in the header, we have the title is hello. So this one will be shown on the browser on the corner left. The left corner means the title of this page, not in the content of the HTML. For example, you open a tab, so that's like the tab title. And then inside we have a body. That's how we generate that content automatically. So we have two. You can find here we have two branches. So in fact, we use the parentheses and the percentage to define the beginning and the ending of the JSP code. And then we test whether the name is null or not. So that means we send a request to the server, and then from the request we can extract a name attribute value. If that name is set, that means there's a value for the name. Then we print accordingly. Hello Mike, hello Tom, hello John, kind of like this way, correct? So if it's not, for example, it's not, that means this value has not been set. Then we just print a general sentence, hello world. So print here means we want to insert these strings into the HTML code, because this code will be sent back to the client side, and then the browser in the client side will run this HTML code, will show accordingly. So if like that, we just print that hello world into that, you can think it like a text file. It's just specific one is HTML specific file. And else, that means if this name, so dot get parameters. So from this one, name is set. Then we'll print hello request and get parameter of name. That means we'll print that name. Of course, you can just assign this one to be a string, but this one just for simplicity, we just add them directly. Just put that request get a parameter name. Okay. So this is one example, and in the next slide we'll talk about the general grammar for the JSP. Okay. So here we talk about the JSP text. So in fact, like the HTML text, we can also define JSP text. So here we talk about the 3 different types. The first one is the scriptlet tag. So that means we can put the Java code inside. So we use this one as the beginning and the end. Just indicate this part is the JSP code. And also we can put in expression into the JSP code inside. So we use equal. So that means the percentage equal to indicate this is about a statement. Like this example. For example, this is the text only, correct? And then inside we want to put a JSP code. Just want to get the current time. So we use this one as the start, this one as the end. And then inside we use Java code, Java utility calendar and get instance and get time. So that means this one will show the current time. And also we can use declaration. That means we can declare a method, okay, a field or method. Like so we use this as the beginning. So like this one, we define a function here. So it's integer is the return type, and then cube input is integer n, and then we return n cubic, n by n by n by n. and the end. That means here we declare a function, and after that we can just call this function directly because we already declared this function as a JSP method. Okay, just define a method in this part, and then we can call it in the JSP code. So for example, in this statement expression part, we have the cube of 3 is, and then calculate. So cube, so call this function and then get a result. Okay, this is the JSP text. Okay, so we just give some initial introduction about JSP. If you want to use this JSP to develop your website programming application development, you can just further learn and develop some easy program should be enough. So you can also try your programming. I think we have a assignment, one assignment for this chapter. You need to develop a program which has both server side and client side. That means you need to develop both. Of course, the later one will give some example as well. So for this client side, we may just use JavaScript. Okay, and then for this one, we can use some other things. We can, for example, use JSP or some others. It depends on your preference. Okay. So here we talk about the PHP. So this one is also a very popular website programming scripting language. So the reason is that it contains a lot of libraries, even about the database access, for example, like the ODBC. And here we talk one example. So basically, you can find here we insert the PHP code similarly, but we use a different indicator. We use the question mark and then PHP. So indicate this is the PHP code. And then here we can find it also have 2 branches. So similar like the previous example. So here we use is set, means whether the value has been initialized. So that means whether this value is whether the attribute is available. So for the request function, the underscore request function, we just get the value from the request. That means we define the request as an attribute, as an array, and then each of them is a attribute. So we can use the attribute name to access the attributes values directly. So if that one is initialized, we echo, so that it will be the else, correct? Because this is that will be not is set. That means not set. So that will be hello world. If it's set, then we echo hello and then the name. That means maybe what's the name of the person or the page. That means request this thing. That for example, we submit a request which maybe contains a name attribute, which indicates maybe a person, maybe something else. So the echo just similar like the print. Okay, that's the PHP code. Okay. So you can also try the following link. That will be very easy. Just print the hello world. So it's in fact just only keeping the echo hello world. So that would be very simple. You can click and then run. Okay. Okay, for PHP, we only give a very simple introduction here. Yeah. But if you want to use this one, you can also learn by yourself to develop a related web applications. Here we are talking about the web application frameworks. That means the second method for the server-side, alternative server-side programming. Okay. So the reason for this one is that we want to utilize the available libraries and the tools existing in the framework to improve the efficiency of web application development. So basically, we said minimize the amount of coding for web application programmer. So that means we can utilize them to improve our production efficiency. In fact, here we talk about the available libraries or tools which existing in the framework. For example, it contains a library which will support HTML and HTTP features. So that means just like we used to create a command, we can just drag and put. So here similarly we can do that one similarly. We can do it easily. So HTTP as well. That means basically we use this one as for the request kind of related to, and also for the sessions. Session, that means you need to finish a list of things during several steps. You may still need to do the user authentication and so on. But once you have done this one, you don't need to repeat. So we want to retrieve the session. We use cookie, kind of we mentioned it before. Okay, and also we have a template. So that means based on that template, will be easy for you to do the coding, right? And also we can handle the events and events handling functions mapping. So of course, usually we can put this one into some files, and then we, for example, later we talk about in the Django we use the settings. Use the settings as the file to map. So that means what event will be called, what event handling function will be called when we have an event for that one. That means we define the relationships. And also we can perform the form validation. So this is so we said is use a relative declarative way. That means a much easier one. So with a form and validation constraints for the user input. So this will help us to do that means the coding quickly. So you don't need to allow the server side to verify this one. So in the client side, you already, when you input the value, you already know whether this input is illegal or not. For example, we only allow 20 characters, or we allow only integer, or we allow only starting date and ending date. Ending date must be larger than the starting date. So for these verifications, you don't need to wait till you send the request. The request is received by the server side, and then we do that. In fact, we can do that one before we submit the request. That means before we send that request out. So once we submit the request, it will verify whether these conditions have been met. Otherwise, we will not allow that request to be submitted. Okay. So for this one, we also can generate HTML or JavaScript AJAX code to implement the form. So that means that this one will help us to get a very simple prototype, and then you can just further edit that one. And also we can do the object-oriented model. So basically we can just for example, we map the data to a database based on this object relationship. Okay, but we didn't cover this part. Just for example, we want to perform the object-oriented relationship. So based on that relationship, we've also saved the data in that based on that relationship, we save the data accordingly in our DBMS. So this one will be just like support the database storage. So next one, we look at some example frameworks. So this one, similar like the previous scripting language, depends on the program languages. So depends on what program language do you prefer, and then we have accordingly different frameworks. For example, like if you prefer Python, then we have Django. If you prefer Ruby, we have Ruby on Rails. So that means we support the Rails framework on Ruby. Okay, and also we have Java or JSP related frameworks like the Apache Swing, Apache OneStrat, Swing, TypeScript, and the Web Objects, like these things. Like we can say some of them might be more popular than others. Okay, but also depending on the application scenarios. And most of these frameworks make it easy for us to create a simple CRUD web interfaces. What means CRUD? So that means you want to get a prototype. So you usually do this create, read, update, and delete of objects or tuples from an object model or a database. So that means we can do this one much easily for the database related things. Create a table, read or update or delete, like these things. Okay, so you can generate those code easily based on the object model or the database relationship. And also basically this will help us to build a simple application much more quickly. That means the prototype system. So once you got the simple web application, you can just further edit the code to build the more sophisticated web interfaces. So this is the amazing thing. That means build the system based on the framework, and then you further modify it. So that means we save your time. Let's look at one example that will help us understand the Django framework. So we'll look at the code first, and then we'll look at some other functionalities. But before we look at code, we need to explain some concepts. So in fact, in the Django, we use a new name for the code. So we in the previous we said it's Java servlet, but here we define this thing as views. In fact, it's still like a short program, so corresponding to some functionality like the event. Okay, and then how can we establish the relationships between the events and the event handling function? So we use a called a configuration file. Okay, configuration file. So for here, for example, we use the urls.py. So this one is for especially for this relation mapping from the URLs to the views. So that means what will be the functions, what will be Django code for request. Okay, URL is for the related to request. Correct? You send a request to what? For example, you submit a form, and then you may also submit the related input, but that one will correspond to a URL. So this one will just establish the relationship between the applications and the URLs. Okay, this is applications. So let's look at this code. So this code, in fact, we have used Python, so we define two methods. This one we'll look at later. This one is just generate the result HTML code. This one we'll do the next. That means the most important one is the view. Okay, so for here you can find we also imported the packages because we use the related things. For example, the connection and the HTTP the request is based on this package. So we have this import this package and also import this package connection. And then let's look at this method. So that means here we define a person query view. So still you can just recall. So in the previous one we have one example. So we talk about we want to do a query in a SQL query, and then we want to get whether it's student or instructor, and then we send a request, send a query like this way, whether it's student or instructor. Correct? So here is doing the same thing. Okay, let's look at how we do that one. So we want to retrieve the database. The first thing is that we need to do the privilege verification. So whether the user, so this request is sent by a user, whether the user has the privilege to access this database, right? So for here, we use this one. If user name not in the request.session, so we mentioned before we use cookie, cat with cookie. So for example, we already verified the user name, then we continue with this one. But if we haven't, so it cannot be found in the session part. So session, that means we got the username or we cannot find the username. So if like that, we need to do the verification. So user login. So this one is we do the login view. So it's another function. So input is the request. In fact, for this one, we ignore those related code, but I want to introduce you the steps we are doing this one. So for the login view, in fact, we just create a HTML code, and then that one we just input your username, password, like those things. So it's a login form, and after you click the login, submit, so this function, so that it will be just purely just HTML code. You click login, go, and then it will just do the another code. We didn't put that code here, but I just want to let you know we do have the another method called authenticate view. So this one will do the verification, and then for this one we will call the person query form. So that means we look at, so this one is in the figure 9.3. let's look at 9.3. Whether we have done the code. Okay, this is this. In fact, this part, only this part is for the figure 9.3. So basically, in fact, it's just like we have a box, we have selection. You need to select whether it's student or instructor. Okay, so that's the code here. So that means that we first one need to input username and password, and then we verify whether you do the student or instructor. So that means first verified, okay, it's has the privilege, and then you want to select, you want to query the student or instructor. Okay, so this is the here. Okay, let's continue. Okay, let's look at this one. So after that means we choose first one, authenticate. So we username, password, that's passed, and then we choose the student or instructor, and then we'll continue with the next one. Okay, so we ignore this this part here. Okay, just put all of these things. That means they will do all of these things in the here. Okay, let's look at once you get that one proved, and then we continue for the next for this one. So based on the request, we get the person type and the person name. Okay, so that means whether it's student or instructor, and which student or which instructor. Okay, and then we do this one. So we have this if else branch. So if it's student, we compose a query template, which is like this one template. That means we haven't input all of the things there, but we have something which are already fixed, so we can write them out. Select ID and name, department name from the student, because this is related to student. Well, the name is equal to, so this one we have like a string. We put this one just as a argument. So later we populate the argument when we perform the query. So if it's not a student, it's the instructor, we change this one. The table name will be different. So other are the same, kind of ID name, dependent name, and this one is the same. Okay, that means we have these two different templates depending on what type of the table you want to query. And after that, you can find out we have the with connection cursor as a cursor. So that means we use the, in fact, for this one we ignore another important thing. In fact, we have this one, that means we already do the database connection. But in fact, what's the database related information? We put this relation information into the settings.py Python code. So this is about is another configuration file which store the connection. Okay, similar like this one. This mapped the URL to the related code. This one mapped, this saved the database relationship. For example, what's the socket information, what's the IP and the port number and related things. Okay, so that means we connect. This one is much easier. That means we connect and then we do the retrieval. We get a result, and this cursor will be just point to that table for the first tuple, first line. So we do this one. The cursor execute the query tempo and then person name. You can find here we have two arguments. The first one is this string. The second one is this one. So this one has an argument. In fact, this argument will be saved here. That means will be populated based on the person name here. So that means if it is Tom and then put Tom, it's Mike, put Mike, right? So just put this one. So it doesn't depend on what table, because the only unknown is this name. What's the name of that student or instructor? So after that means we get a table. So the cursor will point to the first line of that table, and then we now is ready to output the result. So here we use these two lines to do that. First one, we create the headers. So headers doesn't depend on whether it's a student or instructor. They have the same three attributes: ID, name, and dependent name. So that's why we prepare the headers. Okay, the header related to table head. And after that, we call this function. Okay, this method HTTP response, and then result set to HTML headers cursor. So that means this one we just call this, but it will generate HTML code. So this one we only to populate the contents. Other things, of course, we already create. So the other things we don't need to care about that HTML code. So what will be the table contents will be the most concern, the important concern, only concern for this function. So the header, you need to pass it to print it out, and also the address of the table. So let's look at this one. So you can find this one will generate the content of that HTML, means only the body part. So headers and cursor. So HTML table. So this one, the first string, the content. So the table, we want to create a table. The border is 1 pixel, and then we have a table row. So next one we have a table row, and then for this row we first output the header. So we loop over the headers. So headers will be a array, string array. Okay, and then we just for each table head we just add it. So one by one, ID, and then name, dependent name. Okay, so that means we just output that is three attributes, and then we finish the table row. For this row, we finish the first line, the header, and after that we fetch the result from the table, from the cursor, and then output them into the HTML code. So row in the cursor of fetch all. So this one we just loop over HTML table row, and then for each column, that means the value for each each of the attribute, each attribute. So table item, okay, get the result from that one. Okay, in case we have multiple student or instructor with the same name, so we need to loop over all the rows, and each row will loop over all the columns, printed each column out. So once done, we finish this. This is the one row, and then we loop over all of the rows, and after that we conclude the table, right, for here. So correspond to this one, and then return this HTML string. Okay, this will just do the result output. Okay, result output. Okay, this is one example. So in fact, beside these things, you can find that we can do the meeting the request, do the database query, and user authentication. We can do something else. So we list several other features here. So in fact, we can create HTML using Django. We can create HTML forms and also validating those forms. So that will be easy for us to check the input whether it's legal before we send out that request. And also use annotations. We can check in the authentication, make it easy. We also have the HTML page templates. Okay. We also support the object relationship mapping system, like we mentioned before. We can create data, save into the database. Okay, this is about the example for the Django. Okay. So we finished the server-side programming. So we talked about the servlet and the other alternative server-side programming, like the scripting, server-side scripting, and application frameworks. So we also need to talk about the client side. That means we have two. Right? One is C, the other one the S. So this one already done. You can use whatever. But how about the client side? For example, in your project, you need to send a request, right? Do a query. So for this one, of course, I will just highly recommend use JavaScript. Okay, and HTML plus JavaScript. If you use HTML is enough, also fine, but maybe JavaScript will be much easier for you to finish the task, because usually we cannot only use the static one, kind of we need to do something else. Okay, so usually HTML plus JavaScript should be enough for your project. Okay, JavaScript. So in fact, we have some other things we mentioned before, like the cascade style sheets. So this one is easy for us to control the elements. Sometimes we call it object or elements in a HTML page, So we have different same style, styling sheet. So that means we can put that template in a file, and then we can apply across the different pages of one website, make the style the same. And also JavaScript, maybe the problem is sometimes maybe different web browser will have different functionalities maybe supported here, not there. So we want to look at these things. We use just browser independent, so we use JSON. So we can also consider, but should be enough. These two should be enough. Okay, so let's look at why we need to do the look at this part. So the client-side scripting. So basically, the browser can fetch certain scripts. So script, you can think about it is just a shorter program which can run within a HTML code, inside, like the previous JSP. So that means this one will help us to do something. For example, verify the input whether it's legal or not. Okay, so that means we also can just provide us with more flexibilities. Okay, so this one will be or other programs along with the documents. I mean just the web document, and then we can run those short program in the safe mode. Safe mode, that means user do not know it is running, okay, in the client side. So user also cannot interfere with this one. Of course, usually we want to put them into separate things. For example, later we give one example that one put JavaScript and HTML code in the same document, but in fact we recommend separate them from each other and then refer. That means call the JavaScript document, refer to that document in the HTML code. So that means you don't need to put them in the same, right? So you have the JavaScript here, and then you have HTML here. So this one will refer to you define all the functions in the JavaScript file document. So here we talk about several options. JavaScript is the most popular one. Okay, so in the previous we may use something else, but Flash maybe cannot be working now, maybe already outdated, cut, obsolete, and the shockwave. So that means we can have some video, audio, like these things. Okay, and here as well. Okay, so let's look at feature reality markup language and applet. So it's not a function now. Cut. So here, basically, for this client-side scripting, we can allow the document to be more active. That means it's a lot like some static code, HTML code. We can do more things. So JavaScript can do or something else. Right? We can have a video, audio. We can let people input some information and show the results as well, like this. So we don't always rely on the server side to provide such functionalities. We can perform those things on the client side. This is also like the concept code we said have edge computing, right? So because we have more and more mobile devices, edge computer nodes, so we don't need to every time we just occupy the bandwidth and interact with the servers. We can perform a lot of computations on the client side, so we can utilize all the resources on the edge. That means a website, and there's a lot of web things, web devices. So we can utilize all of them. So edge computing, the idea is like this. So for example, like animation by executing programs at the local site. So you show the animation directly. So that means you download the animation and then you can run on your own site. No need to rely on the server one. So maybe you also can generate animation on the client side by running a program. So that will be important, easier. And also we can do the input verifications. For example, when we want to send a request to the server, we first validate the result. Usually we use a form. For example, username and password, or just other information. You validate whether they meet the requirements. Okay. And also we can allow more efficient interaction. So that means we can speed up the interaction by avoiding contacting the server. We can, because even on your own side, you already can do some interaction. So you can do input, you can look at the output, go down, go up, like this in the cat. So this is the idea. So that means we can just reduce the load for the server and also reduce the bandwidth requirement. So we want to recommend the JavaScript. So here we only focus on the JavaScript. This one, even till now, is still the most widely used one. so in the last summer when I talk about taught that program language, web program, we also spend a lot of time for this one because it can make your page alive. So if it's a static HTML1, you cannot do anything. It will be just there, cannot interact with you, with the people. So this one is also the basis of a new generation of web application. We call the Web 2.0. So for this is so it has a lot of things so we can do based on the JavaScript. We can provide more interactivities there. For example, validate the input. We can also change the DOM. DOM means, for example, a HTML code, a web page. It has a lot of elements. So these elements will be form a model, is a tree model. For example, you have form, and then you have some contents. For example, feed 1, feed 2, and then you have some other text. You have some button. So that means you will build a tree. For example, this form has this field input box. Input a text box, and then maybe you have another submit. Okay. So this is just like the document object model. So for example, when we want to retrieve the elements, we use the previous one. We have that get elements by ID, correct? So that one it will retrieve the tree to find the element also called object, and then it related attributes. Okay, so in fact we can change this tree. Okay, change this tree. So based on JavaScript, we can do that. So this one is representing the HTML text, and also we can communicate with a web server to fetch data. So that means we can just do the query. We can do the send the request and get data, get result. So from the request, return the result, we can get data. And also we can modify the current page based on the fetched data. So we populate, for example, initially we get a table, but then once we send a query, we change it, and then we want to show whether the changes have been reflected on the server side. So we change it, we update the current table without needing to reload or refresh page. That means you can do it more efficiently. Okay, and for example, like you have a drop-down menu, and then you select a country, or you have a list of states in that country will be automatically populated if you select one country, and then the related states will be populated automatically. Okay, so this will help us to do the interaction. No need to rely on the servers. Okay, we can do, and also improve the interactivity. Okay, let's look at one example. So you can find this is changed. So I request you to download the slider again because I update the slider again. So the latest one will be uploaded together with this video. Okay. So here you can find that we have a JavaScript code. Okay, and this is the result. This is I input the code into the Sublime. Last time I showed you that one, the editor, and then just save your time so you can test it. So let's look at this JavaScript example. So you can find that basically we insert JavaScript into the HTML code, but I mentioned it before, it's not a recommended one, but this one is very simple. So make it easy for us to read, we put them together, but usually we separate the HTML code from the JavaScript code, and then we refer to that JavaScript file here, put it here. But here is okay, because it's very simple. Why we don't want to put it here? It's just because for safety concern, and also easier for us to make it independent of each other. You don't need to to change the whole HTML code, you can just change the JavaScript code if you want to change the functions. Okay, let's look at, basically you can find HTML, this is HTML code, and then head, So we put the JavaScript code inside. So we have the script, I mean this JavaScript code. And then this is the body, the HTML code, HTML contents. So in fact the JavaScript code will do just only do a verification. So let's look at the body first to know what's the things there. So you can find we create a form. So this form in fact is contain these three objects. The first one is the input one, the input box, which indicated the start date, and the second one is another input box, the end date, and then last one is the submit button. Okay, input. Let's look at start date. Input type is date, ID is start, ID is end, and then we have a line break. So to the next one, cut line break, and the next one is the submit. This button will just the value is submit. Value, that means the text to be shown here. Type is the submit button, input button. Okay, and then for here you can find for this form, that means once we click this one, we perform some function. Okay, once on submit means the function related to this events. Once you click the submit, it will call this one. So the action is submit dates, and then the on submit function will be doing this one, return validate. So what is the validate? In fact, it's a JavaScript function defined here. So let's look at this one now. This one indicates this is a JavaScript code. Okay, define a function here. So name is validate. That's also we found here. And then we have the, you can find we have the retrieve the values. Okay? So we define a variable start date. New is date variable, and then we retrieve that DOM, DOM, document object model. So document dot get element by ID. So based on the ID here, ID, we can retrieve. Okay, we find the start for this one, for this input box, and then is value. Okay, get its value. Similarly, we can get the end date, but this ID will be the end, will be this one, the second input box. So based on the DOM model, we find the object and then get its value. So we have this created these two new data object, put them into the start date and the end date. So if it's start date and date, so in default we have the start date is earlier and the end date is later. Okay? So that's why we want to check whether people have input correct value for the start date and end date. So if the start date is larger than the end date, we show a message. So it's start date is larger than end date. Show this box. Show a box on top of the web page, and then return the false. Okay. So this is just like the input validation. Okay? Input validation. Because this one we cannot even we got is true, we cannot send the request. Okay, you can show this, you can test this code, it can show this result. Okay, so basically you can find we use a JavaScript code to do the input validation, and it also very simple. You don't rely on the server side to perform this one. So you will just do what you can do on the client side. As long as the input is not illegal, we are just let people to do it again till it is legal, and then send the request to the server. Okay. Okay, this is the JavaScript example. So I believe if for your project will be not that is hard, and you just prefer simple things, that should be fine. For example, log in your database, you can use this one as well. Username and the password. Okay, use this type of things. And in your assignment for this chapter, also have the same thing. You need to code the client part. You can use JavaScript, HTML, and the server side. You can use Django. You can use whatever, okay, JSP. Okay. Okay, this is also the end of this chapter. We finish the web programming, and then my plan is that for the next week we'll continue, because after this one you need to continue with the transaction chapter 17. For those for that chapter we already released the instructional video. So after that one, maybe some of the content will be reserved for next week. So after that one, we'll continue with chapter 4. It's intermediate SQL. Okay, some of them maybe, for example, create a view and some constraints, like those things will be useful for your project. So we'll continue with chapter 4 next week. Okay, that's all for this chapter.